Hi everybody, I'm Annika, and today I'm going to be talking about my Chapter 2 Synopsis for my Human Sexuality in Society class. So to start off, the text primarily focuses on sexology, or the science of sex, and how it's incorporated into society and how our ideas of the matter have adapted and changed so drastically over the last couple of centuries. So along with that sexology and talking about the historical background, we also notice that it talks a lot about like the researchers and the researchers' findings and how these findings have brought us to our understanding of sexuality today, which is very interesting stuff. So to go back to the Victorian era, in the 19th century, anything sexuality-wise was discussed only by religious leaders. So as you can imagine, it was a very gender stereotyped approach, religious-centered and biased view on how we approach sexuality. So the Victorian era, itself was a heteronormative time. Anything outside of heterosexuality was seen as abnormal, unnatural, and morally wrong. And the Victorian ideals they had back then encouraged women to refrain from sex and only have sex in the bounds of marriage and for procreative purposes. Whereas with men, we're naturally seen as polygamous beings and were also classified as naturally more dominant, and then the vice versa for women. Masturbation was also seen as a deadly disease back then. So as you can see, our views now are completely different than back in the Victorian era. Up until the mid-1800s, religious leaders had complete control over the social nature of sexuality. After that point, doctors and scientists started to take over that industry and have a more biological approach to the matter. The term sexual science was introduced, and the society started to transition from the Victorian era to the modern era. And because of this transition, we got lots of influential scientists that have brought us to this modern era. The most common person you've probably heard of before is Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was, he was known for his theory that sexual drive is unconscious and directly correlates to how your childhood was. So, the concepts that he brings up is the Oedipus complex, which is essentially a boy's sexual longing for their mothers. And then the other term for the girls is penis envy, which essentially means that when a girl realizes that she doesn't have a penis, she longs unconsciously for a penis and will always have that sexual drive to find a penis. So although Freud's ideas can be seen as like radical and controversial, they've definitely influenced other people to also go into the sexuality industry type of thing and bring up their own findings and have a whole scientific revolution of sexuality. So along with Sigmund Freud, there's been famous scientists such as like Richard von Krafft-Ebing, Havelock Ellis, Magnus Hirschfeld, Celia D. Mosher, just to name a few, and they have all significantly impacted our understanding of sexuality as well. So not only does the chapter focus on the significant contributions that the sexology scientists have found, it also talks about social constructionism in society. So essentially, society revolves around social interactions. And when we do those social interactions constantly, they become habitual. And then after they're habitual, they become rules that are then institutionalized and ingrained in society and have always needed to be filled. And because of this, it is learned and shaped by our culture, and that is why it is socially constructed. Our beliefs and acceptance of homosexuality now versus in the Victorian era are complete opposites, which further proves the idea that our ideas about sexuality will change and adapt with the culture around us, which even goes to say that in 50 years, our approach to sexuality and gender is going to be completely different than it is now. And I predict that it's going to be a little more accepting as well. So the most interesting topic that I found within this text was the how society approached homosexuality in the past. So in the past, homosexuality was classified as a mental illness or a sociopathic personality disturbance, and that was established in 1952. So during the entire decade of the 1950s, if you came out as homosexual, gay, or lesbian, you were almost guaranteed to go into a mental hospital and have to go through conversion therapy. And these treatments would consist of electric shock, lobotomies, and castration. And it wasn't even until 1973 that homosexuality wasn't considered a mental illness anymore. And as recently as 2000, did the APA cancel out conversion therapies. So this just goes to show that our culture and society has changed immensely over the last 50 years in terms of race, gender, sexuality, religions. However, just like the transition from Victorian era to the modern era, there is still a ton of room for improvement, and our understanding and acceptance of sexualities is still very far from what they could be. But in a positive light, I guess that just means there's room for growth. So that is my synopsis of